Hi, I'm Sarah Drehobel with League Real Estate.
And I'm James Miller with Cornerstone Home Lending.
And we're here to talk to you today about the market update in the DFW area and what we see happening and how we think our buyers can win in this market. So it's October, and we just wanted to do a market update to kind of update folks on what they can expect going into the end of the year. I'm celebrating my 9th year, wrapping up here in October, starting October of 2014. So this climate that we're in is actually the highest that I've seen interest rates since I've been in. But, you know, what's funny is that when I got in 2014 and even now, everybody has said the sky's falling since day one, and it's yet to fall. And people are making crazy equity on their real estate. So what have you seen?
Well, to your point, we are essentially ending what has been the best 10-year run in the housing industry in U.S. history. And I started during George Bush's first term in office in the early 2000s, and right as rates were falling below 8% for the first time in a long time, and it was a massive refinance boom. So I feel like, in a sense, after 20 plus years, I'm almost coming full circle as rates come right back to where they were when I started in the industry. But I've gone through that cycle and seen the housing market collapse of 07, 08, 09, and coming through, just a number of interesting moments in the mortgage industry. And this is probably the most interesting that I've experienced in my 20 plus years.
What have you seen this year, and what do you expect to see going forward here?
Well, it's definitely been an interesting year. In fact, if I was going to describe the last few years, I'd say that the housing industry has gone from the wild, wild west to the wild west to now we're just west.
So what I'm seeing in the market, and maybe you can tell me if you agree, James, is that I have a lot less homes to show right now. There's a lot less buyers in the market. And for the life of me, I can't understand why people allow the interest rates to stop them from doing that when a year and a half ago they were willing to pay $50,000, $100,000 over market value in order to get a home, and now they don't even want to hear the ways to combat interest rates. And so I thought it would be awesome if we just sat down and told our clients and viewers what they can do in this market to win before we experience what we just kind of came out of in the years of 2022 and 2021.
Well, that's absolutely considerations worth talking about and thinking about. And I think you kind of hit the nail on the head with one of your introductory comments there, is that there's not as many buyers in the market, and the lack of inventory is a huge problem for that and a contributing factor. A lot of that goes back to when we had the housing market collapse of 07, 08, 09. The builder community and the builder industry was significantly overbuilt. I mean, you had a lot of builders go out of business during that housing market downturn and economic downturn. And a lot of the builders who made it through that have learned their lesson, and they're not building to the same extent that they were 12, 13, 14, 15 years ago. And a lot of them are kind of building more to order at this point. And you combine that with the fact that such a massive portion of the market has an interest rate below 4%, below 3%, below 2.5%. And you have the proverbial golden handcuffs where so many buyers might be interested in moving up or buying that bigger house, but they're not going to trade that 3% rate for a rate that's in the 7s or maybe even in the 8s. So you don't have the move up borrowers, you don't have the shifting around of buying and selling, which is also significantly contributing to the inventory issues that we have right now.
Right. And it's hard as an agent to advise a client that's in a 3% interest rate to then sell that home and go to an 8% interest rate. So as agents and lenders, we've had to get very creative of ways that people can still win in the market. And so what we're seeing and what we like to do, and the properties that I'm targeting, are things that maybe have been sitting for 14 or more days. Like they came on the market and they're priced at market value, but they're not flying off in multiple offers, because then we can go and we can say, okay, is the seller willing to pay this chunk towards buying down the interest rate for that buyer so that they can get into a rate that they feel comfortable with, that then gets them that payment that's realistic and achievable, but also allows them to be a contingent buyer, which up until this point you haven't been able to do. If you had to sell your home to buy, you couldn't buy. It wasn't an option. You had to do a bridge loan or, get family to help you on the purchase so that you could sell after you had already moved.
And I think one of the contributing factors with that is we're starting to see kind of people catch up to reality But for a long time, and we're still seeing some trailing effects of it, a lot of sellers had not kind of accepted the reality of where the market had come. To your earlier point, it wasn't that long ago where you were paying $25,000, $50,000, $100,000 over list price just to even get your foot in the door. That didn't even mean your offer was going to get accepted.
Right.
If you wanted to be taken seriously, you had to do that and do the appraisal waivers and everything that came with that. And the market changed so quickly. I mean, you can almost pinpoint the week in fall of 2022, but the market changed so quickly, and a lot of sellers have just taken a long time to catch up to that reality. And because business is so thin right now for everybody who's still in the industry, a lot of realtors as listing agents, they're sometimes not having that hard conversation with their sellers and saying, this is what your list price needs to be. They simply want the listing, so they're willing to give in to that list price that the seller wants. And you have this disconnect there, and then what happens, exactly as you said, 14 days later, or 30 days later, or 60 days later, you still have a house that's on the market, and the buyers are looking around going, what's wrong with this thing now?
Right.
And so you can kind of create a little bit of a perfect storm as a buyer to really put yourself into an advantageous situation. And right now really is a great time to be a buyer. It doesn't sound like it when you're talking about rates that start with a 7 or that start with an 8 or who knows, maybe even higher in the coming months. But this is kind of a unique opportunity in the real estate market to proverbially have your cake and eat it too, because you don't have to pay $25,000, $50,000, $100,000 over to get a house right now. More often than not, just offering the list price gives you a pretty good shot at getting your foot in the door on that property. And the rates are pretty rough right now. If we look at the last 40, 50 years, rates right now are basically at that 40, 50-year average. So they're really not all that bad, historically speaking. The problem is it's been 20 plus years since they were at that 50-year historical
Right.
average. So we have an entire generation of home buyers who literally, much like the last time the Dallas Cowboys won a Super Bowl, you have an entire generation that has no cognizant awareness of the last time rates were above 7 or above 8%. But because of that economic reality, you can now get a home for a pretty reasonable price, certainly higher than the price was 2 or 3 years ago. But in terms of where the market is today, you can get a home for essentially list price, live with that rate for what will probably be a relatively limited period of time, and then look to do a refinance in the future. And to your earlier point, buyers don't even have to wait out a 9, 12, 15, 18, 24, 36 month window to do that refinance to see some relief in that monthly payment. There are options that are available, such as a 2-1 buy down. That's kind of the buzzword that everybody's heard over the last few months.
The 2-1 buy down, let's educate people what we're talking about, because that's industry lingo. Mm-hmm. And if you haven't been looking for a home in the last 18 months, you probably haven't ever even heard that phrase. So a 2-1 buy down essentially for that first year buys the rate down 2%.
That's exactly what it is.
Okay.
So you take your what's called your note rate, which is just kind of the going rate that an individual qualifies for on that given day or given moment in time. And for the first 12 months of the loan, your principal and interest is based on a rate that is 2 points below your note rate. So if your note rate is, say, 8%, for the first year, your payment's going to be as if you had a 6% interest rate. Then for the second year, months 13 to 24, your payment is based as if you had a rate that was 1 point below your note rate. That's where the 2-1 buy down terminology comes from. That for the first 12 months, the payment is based on a rate that is 2 points lower than your note rate. And for the second year, your principal and interest is based on a payment that is 1 point below your note rate. And then in month 25, your payment adjusts to the note rate. And basically for years 3 through 30 on a 30-year mortgage, that's what your payment's going to be based on, is the note rate. But what's interesting about the 2-1 buy down, it's referred to as a temporary buy down because you're only buying that rate down for a couple of years.
Right.
As opposed to a permanent buy down where you might pay what are called discount points, that you're paying additional closing costs up front to lower the payment each month and save on interest over time. On a permanent buy down, those are what we would call sunk costs, meaning you're never going to get the benefit of that money again. So it's really just a simple mathematic formula to decide, okay, if I'm paying X amount of money up front to lower my payment Y, divide Y into X, and how many months do I need to be in that loan before I become the mathematical winner? And that varies, of course, but it's not uncommon to see 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 years before someone becomes the mathematical winner. Where if you feel that you're in an economic environment where rates are going to fall, which is what most economic prognosticators forecast. Of course, there's no guarantees, no crystal balls, but most economists would project over the next couple of years we see rates fall. And so spending that sunk money on a permanent buy down might not be the best use of the funds that
Right.
can be negotiated from the
Take
seller.
the higher payment
Exactly.
and just, refinance hopefully within that 18-month window, 24-month window.
Yeah, whatever
of
it
the
may be. But
2-1 buy
with the
down.
2-1 buy down, there is a cost associated. Essentially, the monthly savings of the discounted principal and interest over that 24-month window has to be paid as an upfront lump sum cost. And there's different parties that can pay it, but the most common one is that the seller pays it as seller concessions in the real estate contract. But those funds, whether it's $5,000 or $7,000 or $10,000 or whatever the case may be, they're essentially set in a glorified escrow account.
Right.
That every month the servicer says to the borrower, okay, you owe us this portion of the payment. We'll take from your escrow account to make the complete payment and pay it to the investor, Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac, Ginnie Mae, whomever the case may be. But if you refinance before you've exhausted those funds, before that 24-month window is up, those funds are applied to your payoff as what's called a principal reduction. And so you still benefit, as opposed with the permanent buy down and the sunk costs.
Right.
The temporary buy down, you're still going to benefit from those funds even if they're not fully exhausted before
Because
the refinance.
we see on average, it's like every 7 years turnover, and of course COVID changed that because people were moving much quicker. You would see people being at home for 2 years and then on the road again. But I think once we're back to this balanced market that we're getting back into now, you're going to see that more standard 5 to 7 year mark. So with what you're saying, it doesn't make sense for somebody to spend their own money to buy down that rate for the life of that loan, because at the end of the day, that they're not going to see that money back. Whereas on this 2-1 buy down product, they do get to see it back in some form or fashion.
Yeah, and don't get me wrong, there are certainly scenarios where a permanent buy down might very well make sense for an individual borrower. You know,
Right.
there's no one size that fits all. But what we're seeing in the market specifically over the last year or so is that the permanent buy down has been a good mathematical fit for fewer people, and the 2-1 buy down is a good fit for a lot
Right.
of people. And the 2-1 buy down isn't even the only option. There are 1-0 buy downs where your payment is decreased for the first year. There's a 3-2-1 buy down where you can stretch this concept out to 36 months. There's pros and cons, and there can be trade-offs with each of those. But the main thing is just to recognize that there are options to help folks mitigate and navigate through the reality of the interest rate world that we're seeing right now.
Right. And win in it at that, to really be able to have a perfect storm, as you mentioned earlier, to where we can get the home they're in under contract at way more than they would have ever made on it a couple of years ago. We're still in our market so well insulated, thank God. And I think people should know, we've got out-of-state developers chomping at the bit to come to Texas, even in the environment and climate we're in the market nationwide, because of everything that's going on here. It's such a good place to be. So I just always tell my buyers, it's like, I don't care as long as you're in ownership. I never want to take you out of ownership, because it's the best savings account you can have right now because of all of the development, all of the growth that we've seen over the last, especially 10 years.
Absolutely. And granted, we're not in an environment in 2023 and 2024 where we're seeing these 20, 25, 30% year over year valuation increases, but we're still in an environment, just basic economics, supply and demand. Mm-hmm. There's not enough supply of houses to meet the demand, and that is continuing to drive the value of home prices up. Now, it might be 6, 7, 8, 9, 10%, but that's still a really good return on investment.
Absolutely.
There are few things that can beat the housing market in terms of long-term buildup of equity and value and wealth.
Well, and I think, it's just been such perfect timing for so many people, and I've just seen people be able to grow into a house that they, maybe 10 years ago wouldn't have been, it would have taken them 10 years longer to get in the home that they're in today because of what they were able to do in the COVID market. And it just, to me, my passion has always been first-time home buyers, because I just like, get in the market however you can, because there's so many ways to win. It gives you a leverageable asset. It really gives you something that you can put money into and it's protected. You know, to me, it's been the best thing that I've done for myself and my family, is to make sure that I'm in ownership, because I'm taking advantage of every time. And I fully believe that when those interest rates come down again, because they're going to come down at some point, our market's going to go nutty again, because it's already still going well in a very recessionary nationwide market.
And that's absolutely correct. Right now, we're seeing a lot of the inventory issues again, because most buyers aren't interested in trading a rate that starts with a 2 or a 3 for a rate that starts with a 7 or an 8, unless there's a significant, life change reason behind it. But as rates fall, and at some point they will, whether that's into the 6s or even into the 5s, I mean, a rate of 5.5, if that showed up tomorrow, the market would catch on fire in 24 hours.
Right.
Because now we've been at this environment where rates are above 7% for so long that the market has adjusted to it. That's the new normal. That's the new reality. In fall of 22, when rates started to creep over 7%, virtually everybody that I would look to pre-approve, some part of the conversation is, I'm sorry, did you say the rate started with a 7?
Yeah.
I haven't had anybody balk at an interest rate in months now, because psychologically people have just accepted this. This is the new normal. This is the reality of where we are. So as soon as rates come back down, whenever that may be, into the 6s, into the 5s, wherever we end up getting, that's going to be just as exciting as when they went from the 4s to the 2s during the COVID environment. And so you're going to see this explosion where people will say, okay, I might not trade 3% for 8%, but I'll trade 3% for 5.5 for that third car garage.
Right.
Or I'll trade 3% for 5.5 for that extra half acre or that media room that I might want. And especially because as people are building more and more equity, when they do go to sell that home and that demand is there, they're going to net that much more, which can then be put into the next house, and you can mitigate a lot of the potential payment increases, what we would call payment shock from a mortgage lender perspective, and really put people in fiscal environments that they've already grown accustomed to, if not even a little better than what they've grown accustomed to.
Right. And then we'll get to see all the fun lending programs out, down payment assistance. I mean, because that's all of those things you can still get a hold of, but the way those things work is they tack onto your interest rate. So now somebody who wants to use a down payment assistance program has now got a payment that's astronomical.
As famed Nobel-winning economist Milton Friedman once said, there's no such thing as a free lunch.
Yes.
And that's exactly right. And to that point, though, that's one of the biggest issues, if I'm being generous, problems, if I'm thinking worst case scenario, of the housing market over the last few years, is how it has priced out a lot of first-time home buyers. And that entry point to get into home ownership has become so difficult, to the point where if you didn't have that large down payment over the last few years, it was kind of best of luck to you. Whereas now we are getting back into that environment.
Don't be a pessimist. We can still be creative.
Well, that's my point. Now, today, as a first-time home buyer, it's time to rock and roll. You can actually get into a house in ways that were very difficult a few years ago, and in ways that in the coming year or so are probably going to become difficult again.
Right.
So this really is an unusual window in the real estate environment.
Yeah, and I mean, it gets me excited for people who can see that vision, because it's like they're going against the grain in a way, but it's going to be such a benefit to them down the line, because I'm telling you, it's just getting them in ownership, because that equity position, I mean, and what it costs to rent right now is so high. I mean, when you're looking at a rate of, I don't know, $1,500 a month to live in Cleburne. I mean, that's far, and that's like a 1-bedroom, 2-bedroom apartment.
But Cleburne's a wonderful place to
live.
Oh,
I love we love Cleburne.
But owning a home is a little bit of a hedge against rent.
Right.
Because as we all know, whatever your rent is today, in 12 months, it will probably be higher.
Right.
Whereas with a mortgage, yes, your property taxes and your home ownership, home insurance costs fluctuate over time, but that principal and interest, for most people who get a fixed rate loan, that is fixed. So having a mortgage, owning a home, is a hedge against ever increasing interest rates.
Okay, pop quiz. What does your credit score need to be able to get into a home loan?
Depending on different products and programs, you're usually looking at something in the general vicinity of 580 to 620, depending on the product that you're looking at, provided it's a traditional investor behind the loan, Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac, Ginnie Mae, something along those lines.
So if somebody comes to us and they're not ready, we can put them in a plan to get them ready.
Absolutely. One of the kind of taglines that I've used in my 20 plus years in this industry is that every borrower is a qualifiable loan. The question is it today? Is it in 30 days, 90 days, 6 months, a year? I mean, it depends on kind of what you're working with from a credit profile perspective. But it's what I have found over the years is that many people, they just don't know how to start. They don't know how to begin the process. They don't know how to knock over domino number one. Because particularly if you feel that you have credit issues, that can be, some people feel embarrassed by that. Some people don't really want to have a conversation about that.
Or just the fear of the unknown. So many people are scared of just not knowing. They don't know what their credit is. They think they know, but maybe, they haven't had anybody look at it.
And I've seen that so many times over the years.
Well, that was me.
Well, I tell people as well, the 3 lowest credit scores that I've ever seen on a credit report, true story, was my own credit report.
Yeah.
So I tell people all the time, like, look, there's no need to be ashamed or embarrassed here. I promise you I've seen worse.
We can only go up from here.
And James Miller was on that credit report. But, we've helped people raise their credit score over 100 points in less than 30 days before.
Yeah.
It's not necessarily difficult, but it's a little bit of, kind of half art, half science. You kind of need to go about addressing it correctly.
So we've been working together for, I guess, roughly like 7 years now. And whenever
Which in mortgage terms would be 84 months.
Like forever and ever, amen. But when we first started working together, I wanted to buy a home, and we pulled my credit. I was nowhere near ready. I was probably the second lowest credit report you've ever seen. It was like Sarah.
Don't remember.
But I had at that time been paying a credit repair company like $85 a month and to help me repair my credit. And you were like, oh, well, they haven't really done anything. In fact, they've made it way worse. And so what we did is you just sat down with me and we just went through and you're like, okay, pay this off in this order. This is going to boost it the quickest, and you didn't charge me to do it. It was just like, hey, do this plan and you're going to be able to buy a home. And our clients that we've seen do that, I'm sure you have many more outside the ones that we work that do that. It's like so rewarding because at the end of the day, when we got to sit at that closing table, like that took work. And it took a plan and a strategy, but man, when I left there and it was like, okay, I need to pay this off in this order, and then when this one's paid, I go back and we're ready. And then next thing you know, it's been my 5-year anniversary since we closed on my house.
Yeah, and the credit tools that are available today compared to a number of years ago, there are systems in place where you can tell the algorithm, I want a score of X, and it'll tell you here's exactly what you need to do.
Do you charge $85 a month for that?
We do not. So, no. And then there's other things where you can just say, hey, if I do X, Y, and Z, what would the score be?
Right.
So, it's, like I said, it's kind of half art, half science, but with every passing year, it becomes less art and more science because there's a lot more definitive, results behind it. So it's tremendous what we can do to get somebody in a position to purchase a home in a relatively short amount of time. But one of the lines that I always use with my clients is, I can't want this mortgage more than you want this mortgage. So I can give people the guidance, and we can do it in a way that's entertaining, and we can laugh through it and build a relationship. But at the end of the day, it's not my checking account that's paying these debts off to get folks where they need to be.
Right. Well, and just kind of, I guess, to wrap it up and end on this, I mean, the other thing with interest rates, I think, and from an apolitical standpoint, we're coming into an election year, and something's going to happen with the rates, and we hope for the love that both sides, whatever they do, will have an impact on that, and that they will continue to come down. And I think that's a good indicator for a program like we talked about earlier. A 2-1 buy down would really make sense, especially if those rates start to come down based on anything election year wise too.
And even if rates don't come down, let's say they don't, one of the other benefits of a buy down, a temporary buy down, like a 2-1 buy down, is that it gives you a little bit of a stair-step experience where year 1, your payment's a little lower. Year 2, it goes up a little bit. Year 3, it goes up a little bit. But it gives people an opportunity that even if they never have an environment where they're able to take advantage of a lower rate on a refinance, even if that never materializes, they still get to kind of slowly ease their way in to that full note payment,
Sure.
Over an extended period of time. And hopefully in the case, people get raises from their job, or maybe they take a new job that pays more money, or maybe they pay off the car payment and free up $400, $500, $600 a month to offset some of that. So there's a lot of different perspectives that you can take on that approach, all of which are valid, all of which, deserve merit and consideration.
Right. And all of which are making you money owning real estate.
Absolutely.